Hello, Vikings. Today we're looking at Unit 4, Topic 6, Evaluating Public Opinion Data. Basically, we want to understand the credibility and veracity of polls. So I showed the students a quick clip. It was a comedy clip from a show where a man answers the telephone, offers to take a poll, but basically doesn't know any of the answers to the questions. And so we kind of discussed how do his responses affect the accuracy of the poll, and what are some challenges in recording public opinion when you have a large segment of your population that maybe isn't as informed on all the issues that we might want to poll about. So learning objective for today is just to explain the quality and credibility of claims based on public opinion data. We want to try to figure out what makes a poll more accurate, what polls can we trust, and what polls should we be suspect of, basically. So the quality and credibility of polling, remember that there's elements of a scientifically valid poll, basically. The sample size matters. You don't want it too small. You don't want it too big. Anywhere from like 1,000 to 1,500 is usually a pretty safe range for this country. You want to make sure that your poll is neutral and not biased in any ways. You also got to take care to the order of your questions, because the way you ask questions and the order can definitely affect the way that people answer. You want to make sure you have a stratified sample, which just means representative of your population, basically. So you want your sample to look like what your population does that you're trying to measure. Also, you want your poll to be random. You want to make sure these random sampling, basically, so you let everybody has the same chance of being chosen, basically. So polls, reliable just means that it's consistent and repeatable, basically. So a pollster should be able to ask the same questions to a different group of people, but the same type of sample, and get fairly consistent results, basically. If they're getting wide variances in their data, that's showing them there could be a problem with the questions or could be a problem with the samples that they're building. Veracity just means accurate and correct, basically. Important to remember that no poll can ever be 100% accurate, but definitely there's things that can make a poll more accurate and more trustworthy as we're viewing them. So what specific challenges in polling that may reduce reliability and veracity? Traditionally, polls have been done on landlines, and so younger people and poorer people are less likely to have those, so it's then difficult to measure their attitudes. Also, some demographic groups are less likely to answer the poll. It can also be difficult for the pollster to identify who is actually going to vote. And so if you have trouble determining that, then it can mean that you're maybe weighting your sample incorrectly. So contacting respondents, polls are usually done over the telephone. It's the most common way for measuring public opinion. Some pollsters do like to do in-person polls, but others will claim that there's a lot of bias that can come out, even just from the way the pollster is dressed, their tone of voice, their race, their gender. And so a lot of pollsters, in order to maintain neutrality, like to do it over the phone so that kinds of stuff is not revealed to the person that they're asking the questions for. And so bias or skewed results. So again, we should know that poll findings are heavily influenced by the polling process itself. The wording matters, the question placement, all of those can create twisted results or results that don't maybe accurately reflect what the public may think about an issue. A skewed question is one in which you're basically trying to get a specific type of answer from a person. And so a biased poll will use skewed questions and then advertise and publish biased results, basically. So content and phrasing of the question can greatly impact the results of a poll. You have to take care in constructing those questions. Could it be misunderstood? Are there assumptions that the question is making? Is it time frame specified? Is it personal wording? Sometimes even just different word choices and the way we ask about them can change our responses. Is the wording too direct? Does it contain difficult or unclear terminology? And then is the wording, is it loaded or slanted basically in one direction and towards a positive or maybe negative direction too? So sampling error is just an error in statistical analysis that arises from the unrepresentativeness of the sample taken. Also sometimes known as selection bias, because that can create a sampling error. Basically, it's a polling error that arises when the sample the sample that you create is not representative of your population being studied, basically. So maybe you're overrepresenting some opinions and underrepresenting other opinions, basically, but just creating some inaccuracies in your data. So important to remember that the accuracy of any poll really depends on the quality of the sample and the quality of the questions asked. All polls contain errors, and no poll can ever be 100% accurate. And there's even polling organizations now that actually take existing polls and put those together, basically, to try to aggregate that data, put it all together. So again, you're not just looking at one poll, you're looking at many of them and kind of see trend lines over time. So this is a great video. I recommend you go back and watch it. It's how to read a political poll. And the video talked about something called margin of error, basically. This is something you're going to want to look at for. Margin of error may sound bad, but it's actually good. It actually tells us what's the level of maybe miscalculation that could have been done. And so in this, you'll see, first of all, this poll, it's got the poll universe, so we know who is being polled. It's among what likely voters. We also know that they're asking people just in the state of Wisconsin, basically. So they just want doing a state poll trying to track. This is back from 2016. And I showed this to students back in 2016 before the election, actually, and showed to show students how it can be misrepresented sometimes. If you just look at these, you go, oh, well, Clinton's ahead by 5 points. But we do have a margin of error of plus or minus 4.3%. So basically what that means is that Clinton could be as much as, or Trump could be as much as 4.3% percentage points higher or lower, basically. So the range actually is about 8 points or 8 percentage points that you're going to see between the two, basically. That means Trump could be as high as 40% and Clinton could be as low as 37%, basically. So margin of error is important because it will help you to figure out, okay, is this really, really close? The closer the election, the harder it is to predict who will win. So margin of error is just the percent of results that could be the result of a chance and variation. It's basically an amount that's predicted for a miscalculation or a change of circumstances, basically. Things might change, and so that may change the way that people answered a question. And so usually the higher your sample size, the lower your margin of error, basically. But there is a point where we start to see it doesn't really matter how much more people you ask. And in fact, you can ask too many people. And if you overrepresent some, then you will get biased or skewed results, basically. So what are the 4 factors affecting poll results? The knowledge of the topic. If you're not knowledgeable on a topic, then definitely it can affect the results or the measurement. Responses to questions about a topic a person doesn't know about really aren't reliable, basically. Wording of the question, is it neutral or biased? Some questions only focus on benefits, and so they say, would you like this? And so people say, yes, they would like this. You can say 80% of people want more of this. But then if you said, well, would you like this if it meant higher taxes? People are going to answer that question differently. So some questions maybe only focus on benefits and not actual consequences of decision making. It's easy to say we like something, but then when you say, oh, we have to take this other thing away, maybe then we're going to change our opinion on that. Also, opinions aren't stable. They change over time. And so that's why pollsters are constantly having to poll people to measure their attitudes, because we do evolve and we do change over time as we learn new things, as we get acclimated to things, and as new things are introduced in our environment. So some of the limitations of polls are just the lack of quality respondents and samples, the cell phones versus landlines issue is a problem, limited respondent options. If you have a poll that only has like 2 options, you don't offer a neutral or an I don't know, it can really be inaccurate if you limit those responses, basically. So for example, I asked, do you love this class or hate this class? But what if you're somewhere in the middle? How would I accurately measure that if I only give you 2 choices? Lack of information too. Again, if the public doesn't know about an issue, then it's really difficult to poll them on it, to ask how you feel about something when you don't even really know what that is or how it impacts you in your daily life. All right, this is a political cartoon that's just kind of making fun of polls and some of their inaccuracies. I do say that, pollsters always get blamed when they get things wrong, but they don't get a lot of credit for when they do get things right and when they are accurate. The cool thing about polling too is that when they get something wrong, they don't just move on. They go back and study it and they go, let's go ahead and look at that. Let's look at the questions. Let's look at the sample that we built. Let's look at how we're asking those questions and how we're reaching the people that we're trying to measure, basically. So good pollsters, if they get something wrong, they're going to go back and study that because they don't want to continue to be wrong. They always want to improve and sophisticate that polling process. So can we trust polls? Basically, it's a yes and no. It really depends on the poll. And you shouldn't ever believe that one poll is ever 100% accurate. They can be a guide to let us know more so what the public thinks, but it doesn't mean that that's necessarily what's going to happen or how all Americans truly, truly feel. Another video in there if you want to check that out. When I was previewing this back in 2016, an anti-Clinton push poll came up. So I've got some evidence of that there. You can kind of look at that and see, why is that a push poll? What are they trying to get people to think about Hillary Clinton? This wasn't from the Trump organization. It was just another anti-Clinton group, basically, that was trying to push some negative ideas into the public about that. All right, I got some great practice questions. If you want to go back into lecture, check those out. Highly recommend it. And another one that's more so about reliability and credibility of the poll results. And then we just really quickly kind of just looked at what happened in 2016. Did they get it right? Did they get it wrong? So you can go back and look at this, and it's just kind of explanation of what happened in 2016, because some polls were accurate and correct and did show, Clinton was within a margin of error, basically. She still did win the popular vote, too. So national polls are pretty accurate. Some state polls were not so accurate and had some wrong predictions there. So definitely pollsters went back to study that election. And so this is just kind of an overview of kind of what they learned basically as political scientists in studying that. Okay, another chance for practice. This is a free response question. So if you want to test your knowledge on polls, just know that if you're ever asked to identify something in a free response, it's usually the lowest bar, the lowest barrier. Describe requires more detail, more description, and then explanation requires the highest level of expectation. You need to define, you need to describe, and you need to explain and connect it back to the topic, basically. All right, and then there are optional review questions, so you're welcome. I will welcome you guys to take a look at those. And if you have any questions for me, please feel free to email me, or you can throw them down in the chat below. Have a great day, Vikings. Keep calm and carry on.